When we talk about the, no Cold War, I think we have to understand the real continuity between the old Cold War against the Soviet Union and the new Cold War against the People's Republic of China, which is clearest really when looking at Korea, because the first hot war in the Cold War was the US war against Korea, which really began in August of 1950, which is 3 months after forces from the North liberated almost the entirety of the peninsula from occupying forces. And it ended in an armistice on July 27th, 1953. And that was 2 months after the Joint Chiefs of Staff unanimously agreed to use atomic weapons, not only against the North, but also against the People's Republic of China. And since then, the US has refused to sign a peace treaty or to normalize relations with North Korea. And the consistent consensus within the US political establishment has been, really nothing but the overthrow of the government in the North. And along with, China, the DPRK remained and has remained after the overthrow and dissolution of the USSR and the socialist bloc countries, despite really the most comprehensive and complex set of sanctions. They can't even import pens or pencils because of the lead or the graphite in them. And, of course, the military pressures. So the US war continues now for over 70 years. And it's a war against what KJ was mentioning, an alternative social and economic system, one that prioritizes people over profits, and also, an indigenous government, a government that's actually controlled by the Korean people themselves totally. And so, because when Korea was divided in 1945, the US and the USSR agreed to leave the peninsula by 1948. Since 1953, there's been no foreign power, no foreign military or anything in North Korea, but the US has never left. And in fact, maintains, a network of bases of around 30,000 troops occupying the country. So in terms of China, I think it's a mistake to see the DPRK as only a pretext for US military presence and intervention in Northeast Asia. Although the propaganda that the DPRK, represents some kind of threat to the region or to the world remains incredibly powerful in legitimating the US military occupation of South Korea against the will of the Korean people, the occupation of Japan, and the general military presence in the Pacific. And it really couldn't be further from the truth because, the DPRK has never invaded or bombed or occupied another country in its entire existence. And I led one of the last US delegations there before the US imposed a travel ban. And, the reason they don't want US people going to North Korea is because the propaganda that we've been subjected to for decades, so it really easily and quickly falls apart. The DPRK's military budget is about $4 billion. And it sounds like a lot, but it's really the equivalent of the New York Police Department's budget. And actually, if you consider the New York Police Department's operating budget and their central expenses, which in 2010 were about $10.9 billion, it's less than half, right? So I think that's an important perspective for us to have. So, when President Moon Jae-in and Chairman Kim Jong-un began normalizing relations, which was really the predicate or what allowed for Trump's attempts at normalization, President Moon's approval rating shot up to 80%. And you could see the approval rating sort of go up and down as relations with the North sort of advanced or declined. And there's a multitude of reasons, that Koreans support peace and reunification and that they desire self-determination. The South Korean government doesn't even control its own military forces, and the US bases continue to expand there. Last time I was in the South was in fall of 2019, and I went to Pyeongtaek, which is the largest US military base in another country. They have golf courses there, they have schools. It's ridiculous. And it continues to expand. And each time it expands, it displaces, communities there who are largely, farmers and peasants. And so those that remain, their crops, their cattle, everything is threatened by the pollution, by the noise, and by the continual expansion of US weaponry and US forces. And, you know, it's never enough. I mean, just recently, US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, he protested the poor living conditions of US soldiers in the South, called it neglectful, called it unacceptable. And this came during the most recent war exercises, you know, which the media really downplays as simulations, but they did actually involve troop movements right up to the 38th parallel. And historically, they've entailed nuclear-capable submarines and aircraft carriers, the dropping of dummy atomic weapons along the border of North Korea, and the decapitation of the leadership. And, you know, if you're in North Korea, you don't know if these are exercises or if they're the real thing, right? I mean, I was in the North in 2017 as Trump threatened to rain fire and fury down on the country. And, you know, to sort of live with that daily threat is, you know, it's really, you really see who the threat to peace is. And so for some reason, though, you know, when the DPRK tests a missile, fires a missile into the ocean, it's seen as a grave threat and a grave provocation. But the real provocation of the war exercises, the US troop presence, and the continued deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Aerial Defense System in Korea, which the people there have heroically resisted, continue to resist, blocking roads. And, you know, just recently, 2 months ago, US troops mowed down protesters that were blocking a road to one of the bases that was sort of refilling and restocking some of the materials for the missile defense, quote unquote, missile defense system, which obviously is less about the DPRK and much more about China. And the US is really terrified of the normalization of relations between the North and the South, and also the South's so-called strategic ambiguity between the US and China, which are connected, right? I mean, because, you know, one of the main priorities in Korea for rapprochement is to rebuild the railways, right? Which would allow China not only to access, or which would allow the South not only to access the North, but also to trade much more easily with China. And, you know, so it's clear that the people in Korea, in the North and the South, overseas want peace, independence, and reunification, but this can't happen as long as the old and the new Cold Wars continue. And so we have to fight for the US to sign a peace treaty, to remove all troops from Korea, and to normalize relations with the DPRK on the basis that the DPRK is a nuclear power. So, you know, as we fight for peace, we have to recognize that the DPR's military isn't a threat to peace, but really one of the guarantors of peace in the region. None of us, I think, here want nuclear weapons, but as long as the US has them, you know, it only makes sense for other countries to as well in order to have a real effective deterrent. And in terms of building this movement, we really have to fight against the increasing demonization of China, but also the more deep-seated and long-running demonization and propaganda against North Korea, against its people, its government, and its leadership. Peace with China is intricately connected with peace in Korea. The war has lasted for over 70 years, and it needs to end now, before a war with China begins. The Korean people have been fighting for peace that entire time, and it's really time that the entire world peace movement join them, because only a global peace movement of the people and not the actions of individual US leaders is the way to win that peace. Thank you.